and welcome to yet another edition of your weekly international current affairs program, Globe Watch from the Cameroon Radio Television with me, Charles Ebune. At least 64 zettabytes of material exist on the internet. That corresponds roughly to 64 trillion gigabytes of information, if you like, call it data, making data protection and privacy one of the key elements of global leadership, governance, and freedom of information and accessibility components in a world where technology is increasingly becoming a daily puzzle of human life and portion. Take, for example, Gmail, email, Google, YouTube, and all the rest, where nearly everybody's information is found. At least 5 billion of the world's 8 billion people today have an internet identity. But that is just a portion of the data world, which equally includes telecommunications, just like your telephone call number, or if you watch television, and accessibility of such elements. So how do we comprehend the importance of data protection in the world today, at the level of the United Nations, at the level of the European Union, but equally at the level of the African Union, plus Cameroon, one of the latest countries in the world to possess a data protection law? My guest today is an experienced lawyer in the domain. He has worked with the United Nations, the African Union, and extensively in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Barrister Charles Mbelambome, thank you very much indeed for being guest on my program.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thanks for having me here today.
Each January 28 is observed as World Information Privacy Day, or if you like, Data Protection Day. What is the essence of such a day?
Well, apparently we celebrated it here also at Nguafo and Panas because in 1981, the Convention 108, European Convention 108, was the first international binding legal instrument that respected privacy. So they have marked this day, this 28th January, where you create awareness within companies and businesses, sensitizing them the importance of managing data, personal data in their offices and their businesses.
When we talk of data from a broader perspective and within the ambit of the law, what is data protection and data privacy?
Well, data protection, I would not like this conversation to be legalistic. Okay. I want it to be a bit simple so people could understand. Okay. When we talk of data, we talk of your address, your telephone number, your identity card number, when it comes to your computer, your IP number, those numbers which if they link it,
your passport references?
Yeah, passport references. Those numbers, if they link it with you, you could easily be identified. Privacy law is simply the legal rules and regulations how to protect this data, from the collection point to the usage to the storage and the disclosure and disposal of this data.
Let's look at how it has evolved over the years since you talk of an identity issue, the passport, the national identity card, your bank card, and all of that. Since when did we start becoming sensitive to such information?
Well, I'll go back to history. 1890, two American lawyers, Samuel Warren and Louis Brandeis, were the first people to do a legal expression on rights to privacy when they did an article in Harvard Law Review. The article was termed The Right to Privacy. And in this article, they emphasized that privacy is an inherent right. So from there, society and technology started developing. We saw in the mid-20s, a lot of countries started enacting data protection law. In the 1970s, in Europe, we see that there was trade started, international trade, cross-border trade, and so on. So in 1995, the European Union came up with the directives. And then 2016, they came up with the General Data Protection Regulation. which a lot of countries in the world are using to align their own data protection policy.
As a reference point.
As a reference point. And then we have in Africa the AU Cybersecurity and Data Protection Convention, which they call the Malabo Convention. That was, I think it's 2014, if not mistaken. And then when Mauritania signed in 2023, it became effective because they needed 15 nations to sign. So now we have the Malabo Convention. Cameroon has signed but not yet ratified. So this all sets the principles of data protection which companies can emulate to protect their personal data of their citizens.
You said that this is an issue of the right to protect yourself, protect your company, protect the country. But at the same time, how do we unpack the mismatch between data available to everybody as an element of information within the realm of freedom of information and keeping part of it private? What goes into the public consumption part and what does not go to the public consumption part of the data, for example?
I think once you hand in your data to a company, you still have control of that data. Because if you look at the new law, the law gives you the rights to your data. And it is the duty and obligation. If you look at the new law, it gives the companies obligation to protect.
You mean the Cameroonian law?
Yes, the Cameroonian law. And
the one in
the new law that was
last year.
The November last
the data
December,
protection law.
The data protection law in December. There are obligations that have been clearly written there that you have to maintain the confidentiality of this information that are given to you. Some of them are very sensitive information. So companies cannot just put your information out there unless you give them their consent. So the law is very clear on that.
Data intelligence, that is possibly what you are talking about. There are so many forms of data intelligence, like you indicated. You have one which has to do with the rights to vote, which is the oldest form of personal data at the level of political data. That is why people go to the ballot box, polling station, and they vote privately. But I would like us to look at the responsibilities of companies when it comes to these issues. That should be financial regulation of data in particular. How do you ensure at the level of banks in particular that you are avoiding fraud by ensuring that your bank codes are not available to cyber criminals?
I think the law also is very clear here. The law says there must be technical and organizational measures to protect data. Technical measures will be like encryption, access control to data, and so on. So there's an obligation to businesses, local governments, whatever, to protect this data using these tools which had been highlighted in the law.
Let me go back to a country like the UK. What is the experience of data protection in the United Kingdom, for example?
United Kingdom first, before Brexit, was following the General Data Protection Regulation, which was a European regulation. Then the UK came and created a similar regulation aligned to the GDPR with the principles, because the principles are the guiding factors, how you protect personal data. So, and then they have a very strong and independent regulatory body, the ICO. So the penalties are really, really harsh and they are enforced. So in the UK, you have to toe the line and you have to make sure that you respect the privacy of your customers and your clients and your employees.
You basically elaborated the data protection policy and advice guidelines for an independent body like Blind Veterans UK, and I'm sure that has to do with for ex-servicemen who are visually impaired, something of that nature. How did you work it out?
Well, you know, when the law came in 2018, you had to leverage the law, make sure that organizations are compliant to the law. So initially what you do with such things is that you do what they call a data mapping and discovery exercise. The first exercise is that you have to know the type of data you have, the category of data you have. From then now, you start putting in measures and policy how you could protect this personal data. You know, with the new law now in Cameroon, you can be given the law and you'll be stranded what to do. So you have to follow a certain procedure. It's a matter of streamlining the processes for you to understand what you have.
I'm sure that the Cameroonian law is still awaiting what they call le texte d'application, or the guidelines for it to be followed and implemented. If you had to advise a government like Cameroon after the December data protection law, what are the guidelines that you may suggest?
I think what we should be looking at, the guideline first should come up as soon as possible, because the deadline is 18 months. So people need to, companies and organizations need to start being compliant. So we need the text as soon as possible. Having said that, it doesn't stop companies to start putting in procedures in place, because I don't think the text will change a lot of stuff with the law. So first, we should make sure that the text comes out as soon as possible, so that people should start preparing. And, you know, first, the authority is a very, very important, the regulatory authority is a very, very important thing to have. So the government should make sure that they have this authority as soon as possible, so that they should already start to do the registration, because the law says people who are processing data has to register with the regulations and so on and so forth.
At one moment, data protection, yes, of course, everybody agrees to that. My ID card should be kept secret, my bank card should be kept secret, my Facebook account codes should be kept secret. But we are living in a world where crime is extremely very high. And I remember at one moment in the UK, former Home Secretary requested that there should be the end of inscriptions for Facebook and WhatsApp to get the codes to enter into the system of WhatsApp groups that belonged to terrorist organizations. How do you deal with that? I'm talking principally when Amber Ruth was Home Secretary.
You know, the law is clear that before you process personal data of an individual, it has to be lawful, and it has to be fair, and it has to be transparent. Most of the times, companies do not follow that rule. Most, like Facebook or whatever, I'm not very familiar with this case as a matter of fact, but you know, once you go against the lawfulness, the fairness, and so on, you're trapped with the law. That's why transparency, privacy notice are very, very important when it comes to processing personal data.
You are aware of the case between Apple and...
I'm aware of Cambridge Analytica, where they used data from Facebook, which they are accused of influencing the U.S. election a couple of years ago. And you know, they were
exit.
And they were brought to book, because first of all, you have to have consent from the people before you process their data. You know, these big analytics, this big data coming in now, you know, they take data everywhere, and sometimes they don't even ask the consent from the people, and so on. So that is what I know about that.
You deal with the UK situation, for example, which may apply to many Anglo-Saxon countries, because about 47 African countries now have elaborated their data protection policies.
Sure.
And Nigeria, for example,
Sure.
applies a kind of UK model.
Sure.
What does the law say when it comes to punishment?
I think the sanctions will vary per country.
Yeah.
I think most of them are still aligned to the GDPR. So whether they are common Anglo-Saxon countries or so on, most of them get their inspiration from the General Data Protection, European Data Protection. The penalties can be very hefty. I've looked at the ones in Cameroon here, they can go to about 50 million. So this is something where companies have to be very, very careful. They should be compliant and so on. And then what I also notice is that data privacy is not an IT thing. Because when you call people, they say, go to the IT. This is quite a different. It has to, it has to be within the function of the compliance or the legal department. Because the IT, they are just basically there for the technical measures, the encryption, access control, and so on. But when it comes to lawfulness, fairness, transparency, respecting the rights of the citizen is something that has to do with the compliance and maybe the legal department.
When you talked about the Malabo process, which elaborated the African framework of data protection. When you look at the African environment, when it comes to data protection, with all the technological advances going on, Facebook, YouTube, eBay, DeepSpeak, emails, Gmails, available nearly to everybody now. Everybody comes in, does what he wants to do. How do you see it being mainstreamed for the protection of the citizens on the continent as from a continental drive?
I think the first thing is that the Malabo Convention sets a good precedent. It sets a good legal framework. If that framework is followed, I think data of African citizens will be well protected.
What are some of the key benchmarks inside the document?
Well, it talks about the lawfulness, same like the GDPR. It has the fairness. They talk about data minimization, safeguarding the security and confidentiality of citizens, etc., etc. They even go at the level of talking about encryption and so on and so forth.
The interview will be coming to an end soon, but let's talk something which is becoming recurrent: identity theft, especially in the banking sector, in a world where technology and the cyberspace is increasingly dominating the environment. Do we have enough safeguards when it comes to banking laws in the area?
I think, first, Charles, security cannot be 100%, but we try to mitigate as much as we can. I think the banking sector is one of the regulated sectors when it comes to security. And with the new law on data protection, if this is implemented within the banking, the insurance sector, I think the personal data of a lot of citizens will be protected and we could avoid this identity theft.
I'm happy that you talked about insurance because you have worked with insurance companies across the borders, and this is a key element especially when it comes to accidents and whatsoever. You are dead, people cannot control that and whatsoever. What should insurance companies be doing, particularly when it comes to protecting people's data?
First, insurance company, when it comes to data, they have to make sure that they have a good knowledge of the category of data they have. One, sensitive data and personal data. I'll give you a simple example. In a case of an accident, and an insurance company wants to send a car for repairs, and it wants to send the information for this car to repair. He's not going to send, for example, the names and those who were injured in the car because those are sensitive information. He might send the telephone number, he might send the address, and he might send the specification of the accident. That's just a simple example. So they have to know the categories of data, how they manage the data, where they store the data. And the law says they have to have a register of these data they have in their companies.
There is what they call today the silicon influencers. Elon Musk, for example. These are people who own Twitter. Our data protection and privacy for a company like that entirely belongs to him. He sits in Los Angeles, in California, enters into Twitter, does a video directly to have direct contact with voters in any other country in the world. Can that be considered as an element of data protection breach? Politically?
Well, I will not go into the political element of it. I'll look at more the technical aspect of it. Once the law is very clear that you have to have consent from the individual, the data subject, before you use their data. So once he goes there and starts using the data, that he has done disclosure without the consent of the two, there's an unauthorized disclosure, which is processing data without the authority of the people. So he must have breached the data protection, and the law will come after him.
As a barrister, we conclude the interview possibly with a case that you must have handled in the data protection realm. Is there a court case? Is there an example that you have had to sit throughout the process? Well, would you like to share with the audience?
What I would like to say is that I've been dealing with the regulators in the UK in terms of handling data breaches. And with the new law coming here now, the first thing is that you have to have a data breach management plan. This is the guiding documents that will help you how to manage breach. When I was with one of my insurance, I work in one of the insurance company, we had a situation where sensitive data were sent to a wrong address. So we had to go to the regulator. First, the regulator says 72 hours. But the Cameroon law says immediate. So that is a little bit too broad. Because when you say immediate, you leave it, what is immediate? But the European data protection has been very specific. That's 72 hours.
So the qualification immediate should be defined in the
regular text.
In the text that will
Correct.
accompany its application.
That's correct. If you leave it so wide, you will not be able to, immediate can mean anything to anybody. So we had to go with the regulator. You have to first to contain the breach. Try to see that you inform the data subjects, because their credit card information, their address information, all this could lead them to danger. And that is why with the privacy law, you protect people from this kind of identity theft and so on. So from the regulator now, you inform the data subject, you inform the regulator, you try how to mitigate any circumstances which can impair or cause damage to these people. So in a nutshell, I mean, those are kind of cases I've handled. And then, you know, you review contracts. For example, with the new law now, third-party contracts. Because the new law says you have to, the processors, people who are processing documents on behalf of the controller, you have contract with them because you are sharing information from your client with them. So as a lawyer, you have to review also those contracts. As a lawyer also, you have to look at the privacy statement, the information you put out there, what type of data you collect, how you use the data, where you store the data. So these are what falls within the remit of the privacy lawyer.
And with that, we conclude the interview. Barrister Charles Mbelambome, thank you very much indeed for being my guest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ebune. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. The last question on the Panama Canal. Donald Trump says we'll get it back. It sounds like a threat. It sounds like colonialism. If he holds that language, we will get it back. Presume that it was even given to Panama. Russia can make the same claim today that it was a mistake that we sold Alaska to the United States, which is today a state in the US, and that will give you back the money, roughly $7 million in those days when they bought it, that will calculate the amount, and if we don't give, we will use force like you want to use in Panama. Is that possible?
Yes, we already recorded the reactions, not only of Panama, but all those Caribbean countries that
Greenland and others.
Yes, that are considered themselves as, let's say, disappearing in the area while they are still there. But you raise a good point concerning Alaska. It can make a precedence, but I don't think Donald Trump will go far.
Okay. The third issue I would like us to examine is that of global peace. And like you rightly indicated, Donald Trump said that he wants to be remembered as a peacemaker, a negotiator, the man who brought and ended all the wars to an end. So you look a crisis like the one in Ukraine, and he says that if he were president between 2020 to 2024, the war wouldn't have started. And you have seen the injunctions he has given to President Putin, either you end the war or impose sanctions that you have never imagined before. Putin certainly doesn't care to such rhetoric, right?
Yes, I think when...
Russia is not an American satellite state.
Russia is not Panama. I think there are some elements that I think are not well...
As a diplomat, how do you analyze all of that?
No, I think...
Because this is the same attitude that the Biden administration had, kind of threatening, humiliating Russia, or as if it's a baby, it doesn't work at some.
But I think they realize that it doesn't work. And I don't see Donald Trump fighting elsewhere in a different way Russia than in economic area, because if he wants to stop the war, to end the war, and the only thing he can the only initiative or the only area left to him is economic area, and he can take sanctions in that particular area. But at the same time, he will realize, or he already knows, the kind of dependence America has towards Russia on some specific areas as far as technology is concerned and some rare raw materials. I think they will bargain. He is a negotiator. He wants always to be seen as a powerful and strong negotiator who never lose anything. But I think today he's facing another Everest in terms of negotiation, because Putin knows what he wants. His focus is on military issue, on security, and on that he won't give any room for negotiation if he sees that Russia is threatened militarily.